In rural Kentucky, a widowed father repairing his grandfather's farmhouse discovered a concealed door beneath the basement floor, leading to a Cold War bunker hiding $157 million in stolen World War II art. John Turner, drowning in $340,000 of medical debt and facing eviction, had 90 days to save his children from homelessness. The collection could solve everything, but the masterpieces belonged to Holocaust victims' families who'd searched for generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. His choice attracted art recovery specialists, federal investigators, and ruthless criminals. When his son was kidnapped, John faced an impossible decision: betray his integrity to save his family, or honor the dead and risk losing everything he loved. The U-Haul's brakes groaned as John Turner pulled onto the gravel driveway, sending up a cloud of dust that hung in the humid Kentucky air. Through the windshield, his late grandfather's farmhouse emerged like something from a forgotten photograph. Peeling white paint exposing gray wood beneath, a porch sagging on one side, windows dark and unwelcoming. 80 acres of overgrown fields stretched beyond, disappearing into a tree line that seemed to press closer than it should. "Is this it?" Lily's voice came from the back seat, flat and accusatory. John cut the engine. The silence that followed felt heavy with judgment. "This is it," he said, forcing brightness into his tone. "Our fresh start." Connor was already unbuckling, his 7-year-old energy undimmed by the 8-hour drive from Chicago. "It looks like a haunted house. Can I explore?" "Stay where I can see you," John said automatically, though he knew the words were futile. Connor was already out the door, his sneakers hitting the gravel with purpose. Lily remained in her seat, her sketch journal open on her lap. John could see her pencil moving in quick, angry strokes, the farmhouse taking shape on the page, rendered in harsh lines that emphasized every broken shutter, every missing board. "Lily, I don't want to talk about it." She didn't look up. John's chest tightened. He'd become fluent in his daughter's silences over the past 18 months, each one a different shade of grief. This one was resentment, edged with betrayal. They'd left Chicago, left her school, left her friends, left Sarah's grave. He climbed out of the truck, his legs stiff from the drive. The June heat pressed down, thick with the smell of wild grass and something else. Decay, maybe, or just the scent of neglect. The farmhouse looked worse up close. The front steps tilted at an alarming angle. A broken window on the second floor had been covered with cardboard that had long since warped and torn. $340,000 in medical debt. That number lived in John's mind like a second heartbeat, constant and crushing. Sarah's cancer had eaten through their savings, their insurance maximums, everything. Then it had eaten through Sarah herself, leaving him with 2 children, a foreclosed condo, and a grandfather's inheritance he'd never wanted. Connor was already at the barn, peering through gaps in the weathered boards. "Dad, there's stuff in here. Old tools and—" "Don't go inside," John called. "It's not safe." He moved to the back of the U-Haul, lowering the door. Their belongings looked pathetic in the cavernous space. A few pieces of furniture they'd salvaged, boxes of clothes, the kids' toys and books, everything they owned in the world, and it didn't even fill half the truck. A rust-spotted mailbox leaned near the driveway. John approached it with a sense of dread he couldn't quite name. Inside, beneath a layer of circulars and junk mail, he found an official envelope. The return address made his stomach drop: County Tax Assessor's Office. His hands shook as he tore it open. Final notice of tax delinquency. The words blurred together, but the important parts stood out in bold. $12,000 in back taxes. 90 days to pay or the property would be seized and sold at auction. 90 days. John looked at the farmhouse again, really looked at it. The inheritance that was supposed to be their salvation was just another trap. Another impossible situation. Another way he was failing his children. "Dad!" Connor's shout carried excitement rather than fear. "I found something." John folded the notice and shoved it in his pocket. Later. He'd deal with it later. He found Connor in what must have been Thomas Turner's bedroom, standing beside a dresser with drawers hanging open. The boy held a framed photograph, his eyes wide with discovery. "Look, is this great-grandpa?" The photograph showed a young man in a U.S. Army uniform, probably early 20s, standing at attention with the rigid posture of someone unused to being photographed. The face was lean and serious, eyes looking somewhere beyond the camera. On the back, in faded ink, Thomas Turner, 1944. "Yeah," John said quietly. "That's him. He was a soldier." Connor's voice filled with the hero worship only a 7-year-old could muster. Like a real war hero, John had met Thomas Turner exactly 4 times in his life. The old man had been distant, uncomfortable around children, quick to retreat into silence. John's father, Thomas's only child, had died when John was 12, severing even that tenuous connection. When the lawyer called 3 months ago to inform him he'd inherited the property, John had felt no grief, only confusion. They'd been strangers. Now, looking at the young soldier's face, John wondered what this man had seen, what he'd done, what secrets he'd carried through 50 years of isolation on this failing farm. "Can I keep this?" Connor asked. "Sure, buddy. Put it somewhere safe." The sun was setting by the time they'd unloaded the essentials. Lily had claimed a bedroom upstairs without comment, closing the door behind her with a finality that made John's throat tight. Connor, meanwhile, had turned the downstairs bedroom into a fort using boxes and blankets, his imagination transforming decay into adventure. John found himself in what passed for a kitchen. Ancient appliances, water-stained linoleum, a table that wobbled when he touched it. He made peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because the stove didn't work and he was too exhausted to figure out why. They ate in silence. Connor asked if they could roast marshmallows tomorrow. Lily asked nothing, just sketched in her journal, her sandwich half-eaten. After the kids were in bed, Connor excited, Lily resentful. John lay on a bare mattress in the master bedroom, listening to the farmhouse settle around him. The ceiling had a leak. He could hear water dripping into a bucket he'd placed in the corner. The sound was rhythmic, relentless, like a clock counting down. 90 days, $12,000, $340,000 in debt. No job, no prospects. The math was impossible. Sarah's voice came to him then, not quite a memory, more like an echo of how she used to think. He could almost hear her saying it. "There's always a way, John. You just have to find the good in this place." But Sarah had believed in optimism even when the doctors gave her 6 months. She'd believed things worked out right up until they didn't. And now she was gone, and he was alone in a stranger's house with 2 children depending on him, and there was no good here. Just rot and ruin and the crushing weight of decisions that had led him to this exact moment of failure. He closed his eyes against the tears that wanted to come. Somewhere in the darkness of the house, something creaked. Old wood settling, or maybe a door he'd forgotten to secure. The sound of secrets waiting to be found. Tomorrow he'd start with the foundation. The basement showed signs of water damage, cracks in the concrete that could undermine the entire structure. If he was going to have any chance of keeping this place, of giving his kids even this broken shelter, he needed to shore up the basics. He didn't know it yet, but that decision would change everything. In the darkness, John Turner lay awake, haunted by the ghost of his wife's optimism and the photograph of a grandfather he'd never known. 2 men separated by generations, bound by blood and now by this failing farm. One who'd kept secrets, one who was drowning in debt and desperation. Outside, the Kentucky night pressed close, and 80 acres of land held their breath, waiting for what came next. John's hands were raw by mid-morning, his palms blistered from prying away chunks of deteriorated concrete. The basement's foundation crack ran floor to ceiling, wider at the top, splitting the wall like a jagged wound. Water stains darkened the concrete around it, evidence of years of seepage eating away at the structure. He'd sent the kids to explore the upper fields, far enough to be safe, close enough to hear if he called. The separation felt necessary. They didn't need to see him this desperate, trying to salvage a house that probably deserved to be condemned. The crack didn't follow natural stress patterns. John had watched enough home renovation videos during sleepless nights to recognize that much. Stress cracks radiated from corners, from points of structural weakness. This one ran too straight, too deliberate. He pressed his palm against the wall, testing. The concrete shifted. Not crumbled. Shifted. John's pulse quickened. He pushed harder, feeling the entire section move inward slightly, then spring back like it was mounted on hinges. His fingers found the edge. Not a crack at all, but a seam, expertly disguised to blend with the foundation's natural deterioration. What the hell? He grabbed a pry bar from his toolbox and worked it into the gap. The mechanism resisted, corroded from decades of disuse, but something inside gave way with a metallic click. The entire section of wall swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing darkness beyond. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of concrete and stale preservation. Not decay, but sealed time. John fumbled for his phone, activating the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow passage with walls of poured concrete. Metal brackets lined the sides, empty now of whatever they'd once held. The passage extended 15 feet before opening into what looked like a staircase descending into deeper blackness. His hands shook as he stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately. The passage was maybe 3 feet wide, the ceiling just tall enough for him to stand upright. His footsteps echoed against concrete that looked military-grade, reinforced with steel mesh visible where the surface had chipped. The staircase descended 20 feet, each step precisely measured and solid despite the years. At the bottom, another door, this one heavy steel with a wheel lock like something from a submarine. John gripped the wheel, expecting resistance, but it turned smoothly. Someone had maintained this. Recently, the door swung open onto a room that made his breath catch. 40 feet square, the bunker spread before him like something from a Cold War museum. Metal shelving lined the walls, stocked with preserved food in military-grade containers, rations, water purification tablets, medical supplies still sealed in their original packaging. A generator sat in one corner, industrial-sized and meticulously maintained. Emergency lighting flickered on automatically as he entered, powered by some backup system he couldn't identify. But it was the far wall that stopped him cold. Another door, smaller, with a biometric lock mounted beside it, fingerprint scanner, retinal sensor, the whole security apparatus looking decades old but still blinking with faint red standby lights. John approached slowly, his phone forgotten in his hand. The scanner was dead, its power source long depleted, but the door itself stood slightly ajar. Someone had disabled the lock. Recently enough that the hinges didn't protest when he pulled it open. The vault beyond was climate-controlled, the air dry and perfectly temperature-regulated by systems that hummed quietly in the walls. His flashlight beams swept across the space, catching edges of frames, glints of gold leaf, the unmistakable texture of canvas. Paintings, dozens of them, covered in protective sheets. John's hands trembled as he pulled back the first covering. The woman in the portrait stared at him across centuries. Renaissance era, her expression serene, her clothing rich with detail that spoke of wealth and status. Even with his limited art knowledge, John recognized quality. This wasn't a reproduction. This was real. He moved to the next. A landscape, impressionist style, showing a garden in summer light. The brushwork was confident, masterful. His phone's weak signal barely functioned this deep, but he managed to photograph the signature. Searched. Claude Monet. Water Lilies series. Reported stolen from a private collection in Paris. 1943. John's vision swam. He photographed the next painting. Searched again. Pierre-Auguste Renoir. Portrait of a young woman. Stolen from a Jewish family's estate in Vienna. 1938. Never recovered. His legs gave out. He sat hard on the concrete floor, his phone clutched in shaking hands as he searched painting after painting. Each one had a story. Each one was listed in databases of stolen art, cultural property crimes, Holocaust-looted treasures that families had spent generations trying to find. The estimated values made his chest tight. 15 million. $23 million. $40 million for a single Vermeer that museums had declared lost forever. He did rough math, his marketing background kicking in even through the shock. Conservative estimates, accounting for black market penalties, insurance complications, $157 million. Minimum. Sitting in his grandfather's secret vault. John's phone slipped from his fingers. The sound of it hitting concrete seemed impossibly loud in the sealed space. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to steady his breathing, trying to process what he'd found. This could save them. Every debt paid. College funds for both kids. Security for the rest of their lives. Everything Sarah had wanted for their children before cancer had stolen her future. But these weren't just paintings. They were stolen. From families who'd lost everything. From people who died in camps, in fires, in the systematic destruction of an entire culture. His grandfather had been a soldier. Had been there in Europe during the liberation. Thomas Turner, the quiet veteran who'd spent 50 years alone on this farm, who'd never spoken about the war, who'd built a Cold War bunker to hide this. John stood on unsteady legs, moving deeper into the vault. In the corner, he found a metal lockbox, military issue, with a combination lock that had been forced open. Inside, leather-bound journals, yellowed papers, and photographs of European towns in ruins. He opened the top journal. The handwriting was precise, controlled, the entries dated starting in 1945. I took from those who stole. The first page read, "They will never need these again. My country will never pay me what I'm owed for what I've seen, what I've done. This is payment. This is survival." John read 3 more entries before he had to stop. His grandfather's justifications and guilt bleeding together across pages of confession. Footsteps sounded overhead. Connor's voice calling for him, excited about something he'd found in the barn. John closed the journal, looked at the paintings surrounding him, beautiful, valuable, stolen. His phone had 1 bar of signal. Enough to make a call. Enough to report this. Enough to do the right thing and condemn his children to poverty. Or enough to research how to sell art quietly. How to save his family with blood money and live with that choice. He stood in the vault, surrounded by his grandfather's theft and his own desperation, and understood with terrible clarity that whatever he decided in this moment would define the rest of his life. The paintings watched him with their stolen eyes, waiting for judgment. John sealed the vault and climbed back to the basement, his mind spinning with calculations he knew were dangerous. He'd made Connor promise not to mention Grandpa's old storage room to anyone, turning discovery into conspiracy with a 7-year-old's pinky swear. The lie had tasted wrong even as he'd spun it into adventure, watching his son's eyes light up with the thrill of a secret. That was 3 days ago. Now, laptop open on the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, John scrolled through database after database, each search pulling him deeper into a history he'd never wanted to understand. The Art Loss Register, the Commission for Looted Art in Europe, Holocaust Asset Litigation. Each painting had a file, a provenance, a story of theft that made his chest tighten. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Renoir, portrait of Mademoiselle Strauss, had belonged to a Jewish family in Vienna. Confiscated in 1938 during Kristallnacht. The parents, Jacob and Miriam Strauss, had died at Auschwitz. One daughter survived, Rebecca, born 1934. She'd be 78 now. Somewhere. Still searching. John closed the laptop, pressing his palms against his eyes until stars burst behind his lids. The envelope had arrived that afternoon. Debt collection lawsuit. The firm was aggressive, known for garnishing wages that didn't exist and seizing assets before debtors could protect them. They'd frozen what remained of his checking account, $843 that was supposed to feed his children for the next 2 weeks. He'd sat in the truck outside the post office, reading the legal notice 3 times, feeling the walls close in. 90 days until the farmhouse sold for taxes. 60 days until a court judgment gave collectors legal claim to anything he owned, inherited, or acquired. The math was brutal and simple. Sell 2 paintings privately. Maybe 3. Enough to clear the debt and secure the property. No one would know. No one would be hurt who hadn't already lost everything decades ago. The rationalization felt slippery in his mind, hard to hold on to, harder to let go. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. John tensed, but it was just the house settling, or Connor, whose nightmares had gotten worse since Sarah died. The boy still didn't understand permanence. Kept asking when Mom was coming home like death was a business trip that ran long. John opened Thomas's journal again, reading by the laptop's glow. July 15, 1945. Found the cash in what remained of Standerton Coon's estate. The bastard won't need these masterpieces where he's gone. I've seen what they did. The camps, the ovens, the bodies stacked like cordwood. If this is theft, then I'm stealing from thieves. My country will give me a medal and a pension that won't cover rent. This is my payment for the things I can't unsee. The entries continued across months, years. Thomas's justifications eroding into guilt, then into something harder, acceptance of his own damnation. March 3, 1963. Built the vault's climate control system today. 17 years I've kept these. 17 years of telling myself it was justified. But theft is theft. I took from those who stole, but I still took. I've spent 50 years in a prison of my own making. No wife, no real family. Just these paintings and the ghosts of people I'll never know. The cycle continues. The stolen stay stolen. And I rot here with my choices. John's hands shook as he turned pages. His grandfather had known. Had lived with the weight of it for half a century. Built this farm into a fortress of isolation. Died alone with his secret. Was that John's future? Trading one prison for another? His phone buzzed. Email notification. He almost ignored it, but the sender's name caught his eye. Midwest Regional Hospital Debt Services. The message was form letter efficient. Additional interest accrued. Payment plan options available. Please contact immediately to avoid further legal action. The number at the bottom had grown. $347,892. 16. John did the math automatically. 2 paintings. The Monet and maybe the smaller Degas. Private sale, black market prices ran 60% of legitimate value. Still enough. More than enough. He opened a new browser tab. Typed, "How to sell art privately." Stopped. Deleted it. Tried again. Art dealers, private collectors, no questions. The search results made his stomach turn. Forums discussing authentication, provenance laundering, shipping routes that avoided customs. A whole ecosystem built on moving stolen property, cleaning its history, making the illegitimate legitimate. He could do this. Market research was his background. Building client relationships, finding the right buyers, negotiating deals. The skills transferred. His cursor hovered over a promising link. Connor's voice cut through the darkness. "Dad." John slammed the laptop closed, heart hammering. His son stood in the doorway, small and rumpled in Batman pajamas, clutching the stuffed rabbit Sarah had given him during her last hospital stay. "Can't sleep, buddy?" "Had a bad dream." Connor's voice was small. "About Mom. She was calling for me, but I couldn't find her." John crossed the kitchen, scooping his son into his arms. The boy was getting heavy, growing in ways Sarah would never see, and the thought made John's throat close. "I'm here," he whispered into Connor's hair. "I've got you." "Are we poor?" Connor asked suddenly. "Tyler at school said we must be poor because our house is broken and we don't have a car like his dad. 7 years old and already learning shame. Already internalizing their failure. "We're figuring things out," John said carefully. "Sometimes life is hard. But we're together and that's what matters." "The treasure in Grandpa's room," Connor whispered. "Could that help? With the broken house?" John's blood went cold. "What did I tell you about that?" "It's our secret." "I know. I didn't tell anyone." Connor pulled back, his eyes serious in the dim light. "But Mom used to say that when you find something valuable, you should use it to help people. Could we use it to help us?" Out of the mouths of children. Sarah's words, Sarah's values, coming back through their son to judge him. It's complicated, John managed. Mom said complicated just means you have to think harder about what's right. John carried Connor back to bed, tucked him in with the rabbit, sat beside him until the boy's breathing evened into sleep. Then he returned to the kitchen, to Thomas's journal, to the laptop that promised solutions and damnation in equal measure. He read the final entry his grandfather had written, dated 3 weeks before the old man died. To whoever finds this, if anyone does, I justified it all. Told myself I was taking from monsters, that I deserved payment for witnessing hell. But monsters stole these from families, from children who died in camps, from lives that deserved remembering. I took their memories and buried them here with me. I can't make it right. I'm too old, too afraid, too far gone in my own cowardice. But maybe you can. Maybe you can break the cycle I couldn't break myself. Or maybe you'll do what I did, choose survival over ethics and live with the weight. Either way, you'll understand what it costs. God forgive me. God forgive us both. John closed the journal, opened his laptop, stared at the search bar where his half-formed query waited. Outside, an engine rumbled in the distance. Headlights swept across the window, unusual for their isolated road at this hour. The vehicle slowed near the property line, then continued on. But John had seen the tire tracks the next morning. Fresh impressions in the soft shoulder. Someone watching. Someone waiting. He'd triggered something with his research. Left digital footprints in databases monitored by people who made their living finding exactly what he'd found. The choice was already being made for him. The secret was already spreading. And John Turner, sitting in his dead grandfather's kitchen with his sleeping children upstairs and a fortune in stolen art buried beneath his feet, understood that he'd already crossed a line simply by waiting. The paintings had names, had families, had histories written in blood and ash, and he'd spent 3 days calculating how to profit from that suffering. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "What kind of man are you becoming?" John didn't have an answer, but morning was coming, and with it, the reckoning he'd been trying to avoid. The woman appeared on John's porch at 9 in the morning, her rental car still running in the driveway. She was maybe 50, dressed in practical traveling clothes, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a way that suggested efficiency over style. But it was her eyes that made John's stomach drop, sharp, assessing, the look of someone who'd spent a career reading lies. "Mr. Turner?" Her accent carried Eastern European undertones, softened by years elsewhere. "My name is Dr. Helena Kovalenko. I wonder if we might talk." John's hand tightened on the doorframe. About the internet searches you've been conducting. The art loss register flags certain query patterns." She smiled, but there was steel beneath it, particularly when someone photographs specific stolen works and cross-references them with Holocaust restitution databases at 2 in the morning. The blood drained from John's face. Helena's expression softened slightly. "I'm not here to threaten you, Mr. Turner. I'm here because those paintings have families. Real people who've spent their entire lives searching for any trace of what was stolen from them. May I come in?" John's mind raced through options, denials, excuses. But Helena's gaze told him she already knew. The searches had been flagged. His grandfather's wartime service record was probably already pulled. The connection had been made. He stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where John had spent 3 nights researching how to sell stolen art. Helena set down a worn leather portfolio, her movements deliberate. "Your grandfather was Thomas Turner, Army Corps of Engineers, stationed in Germany during the liberation. He was part of the team that catalogued Nazi assets in the Bavarian region." She opened the portfolio, producing documents John had never seen. He had access to recovery operations, to estates being inventoried, to art caches hidden by fleeing officers. "I didn't know," John said, "about any of it. He died 3 months ago. We barely knew each other." "I believe you." Helena pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the table. "But that doesn't change what he did, or what you found." The photograph showed a young girl, maybe 4 years old, standing in an elegant room before a painting John recognized instantly. The Renoir. Portrait of Mademoiselle Strauss. The girl wore a white dress, her dark hair in careful curls, her smile captured in the moment before the world fell apart. Vienna, 1938, Helena said quietly. 3 weeks before Kristallnacht. That's Rebecca Strauss. She's 78 now. Lives in Berlin. She's the only member of her family who survived the camps. John's throat closed. The girl in the photograph had Rebecca's eyes. Eyes that had watched her parents dragged away, had hidden in basements and attics, had survived when millions didn't. Helena produced more photographs. A family standing before a landscape. An elderly couple in front of what looked like the Degas. Each image a moment frozen before catastrophe. Each painting a witness to lives destroyed. The Monet belonged to the Goldman family. Parents and 2 sons died at Treblinka. The Vermeer was taken from a museum in Amsterdam. The curator who tried to hide it was shot. The Degas. Stop. John's voice cracked. Please. Helena studied him with something that might have been sympathy. You're drowning in medical debt. Recent widower. 2 children. This farmhouse is 90 days from foreclosure. She'd done her research too. I understand desperation, Mr. Turner. My grandmother was Polish. Lost everything in the war, including a family art collection we've never recovered. I know what it means to need, to survive at any cost. Then you know I can't just... John stopped, hearing how it sounded. Can't just give back what was never yours to keep? Helena's tone sharpened. These paintings don't belong to you. They don't belong to your grandfather. They belong to the families who watched them taken away, who spent generations searching, who deserve to have something, anything, returned from the ashes. John stood abruptly, his chair scraping across linoleum. My wife died 18 months ago. Cancer. We spent everything trying to save her. Everything. Now I'm $340,000 in debt with 2 kids who've already lost their mother. This house is falling apart. I have no job, no prospects, and 90 days before we're homeless. So forgive me if I'm not ready to just hand over the one thing that could save my children. Your children. Helena's voice went quiet. What do you want them to learn from this, Mr. Turner? That survival justifies theft? That other people's suffering matters less than our own comfort? The kitchen door swung open. Lily stood there, her sketch journal clutched to her chest, her eyes wide. Dad? What's happening? John's heart stopped. How much had she heard? Helena turned, her expression softening as she looked at the girl. Hello. You must be Lily. Who are you? Lily's voice carried suspicion beyond her years. I'm someone who helps return stolen things to their rightful owners. Helena glanced at John. Your father found something that belongs to other families. We're discussing what should be done about it. Lily looked between them, her artist's eye reading the tension. The paintings. In Grandpa's secret room. John felt the floor drop away. Lily? Connor told me. He's terrible at keeping secrets. She moved into the kitchen, setting her journal on the table. Are they really stolen? Helena nodded. During World War II. From Jewish families. From museums. By Nazis and by people like your great-grandfather who took advantage of chaos. Lily absorbed this, her expression unreadable. Then she opened her journal, flipping to a page filled with sketches. John recognized them. Studies of the paintings she must have glimpsed before he'd sealed the vault. The Renoir girl. The Monet garden. Each rendered with careful detail. Mom used to say that art tells stories, Lily said quietly. That paintings remember things even when people forget. She looked at her father. These paintings remember their real families, don't they? John couldn't speak. Mom would say to give them back. Lily's voice was small but certain. That's what good people do, even when it's hard. Helena reached into her portfolio, pulling out the photograph of young Rebecca Strauss. She placed it beside Lily's sketch of the Renoir. The same painting, 70 years apart. This girl is still alive, Helena said gently. Still searching for anything that survived. Imagine if you could give her this piece of her family back. Lily stared at the photographs, her eyes filling with tears. Dad. John looked at his daughter, Sarah's daughter, inheritor of her mother's moral clarity, and felt something break inside him. The rationalizations he'd built over 3 sleepless nights crumbled under a 10-year-old's understanding of right and wrong. I need time, he managed, to think. Helena stood, gathering her materials. She left a business card on the table. 48 hours, Mr. Turner. Then I contact the FBI art crime team. Not because I want to hurt you, but because those families have waited long enough. She paused at the door. Your grandfather lived with his choice for 50 years. Died alone with his guilt. You have a chance to break that cycle. For your children's sake, I hope you take it. The door closed behind her. The rental car's engine faded into the distance. John and Lily sat in silence. Finally, Lily spoke. Are we going to lose the house? Probably. Will we be okay? John looked at his daughter. Motherless, uprooted, already carrying grief no child should bear. I don't know, honey. She nodded, accepting his honesty. Then she pushed her journal toward him, open to a fresh sketch. Sarah's face, rendered in loving detail from memory. Beneath it, in Lily's careful handwriting, what would make her proud? John's vision blurred. He pulled Lily into his arms, holding her while his world rearranged itself around a truth he'd been avoiding. The paintings weren't his salvation. They were someone else's stolen memories. And keeping them would make him exactly what his grandfather had been. A thief who justified theft, who chose survival over ethics, who passed his sins down through generations. That evening, John found fresh tire tracks near the property line. Deeper than before. Someone had stopped, watched, waited. Helena wasn't the only one who'd noticed his searches. And 48 hours suddenly felt like both too much time and nowhere near enough. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and fryer grease, the kind of place where locals gathered and strangers stood out. John had driven 20 minutes to find anonymity, needing space to think away from the farmhouse's oppressive walls. He'd left the kids with Ray Donovan. The contractor had stopped by that morning with supplies, his weathered face creasing with concern when he'd seen John's exhaustion. John sat in a corner booth, nursing cold coffee, staring at Helena's business card like it might offer answers it didn't contain. Mind if I join you? The voice was smooth, accentless in that way that suggested careful cultivation. John looked up to find a man sliding into the opposite seat uninvited. Mid-50s, expensive casual clothes that didn't belong in rural Kentucky, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm not Victor Arsov. The man extended a hand John didn't take. And you're John Turner, recent inheritor of the old Turner property. Father of Lily, age 10, and Connor, age 7. Currently residing at 4247 Old Mill Road, approximately $347,000 in medical debt, 90 days from foreclosure on a property assessed at $63,000. John's blood went cold. Who the hell are you? A businessman. Someone who solves problems. Victor's smile widened slightly. You have something valuable. I represent someone who would very much like to acquire it. Discreetly. I don't know what you're talking about. Please. Victor's tone suggested disappointment. Dr. Kovalenko visited you yesterday morning. Stayed 47 minutes. Left with nothing. That suggests negotiation. That suggests you haven't yet decided to simply hand over your grandfather's collection to the authorities. He leaned forward. That suggests you're a practical man facing an impossible situation. John's hands clenched beneath the table. You've been watching my house. I've been watching the collection for 20 years. Your grandfather was careful but not invisible. When he died, I waited to see what would happen. When you started your midnight research sessions, well, flags go up in certain databases. Victor pulled out his own phone, scrolling through what looked like screenshots of search histories, IP addresses, database timestamps. You left quite a trail for someone trying to be discreet. What do you want? To help you. Victor's tone turned almost gentle. $20 million. Cash. Untraceable. Delivered within 1 week of our agreement. You walk away debt-free with enough to secure your children's futures. The art goes to someone who appreciates beauty rather than bureaucracy. Everyone wins. The number hit John like a physical blow. 20 million. More than enough. More than he'd dared calculate in his darkest fantasies. Those paintings belong to families. Those paintings belonged to families 70 years ago. Victor's interruption was sharp. The families are dead. The survivors are elderly and childless. Museums will lock the art in climate-controlled storage where no one sees it except researchers with appointments. My client will display them, appreciate them, give them the life they deserve. Your client who deals in stolen art. My client who understands that ownership is a legal fiction. Those paintings have survived wars, theft, decades underground. They don't care who holds title. They simply exist, beautiful and eternal. Victor's eyes hardened slightly. Unlike your children who need stability, security, a father who can provide for them. John thought of the foreclosure notice, the debt lawsuit, Lily's sketches of a mother she'd never see again, Connor's nightmares and questions about being poor. I need to think. Of course. Victor stood smoothly. But think quickly. Dr. Kovalenko gave you 48 hours. I'm giving you 72. After that, the offer expires and other arrangements must be made. He paused. Your daughter walks home from her new school, doesn't she? 3/4 mile down Old Mill Road. Your son attends the elementary school on Parker Street. Bus picks him up at 7:45. The threat landed like ice water. If you touch my children, I would never. Victor's smile returned, all warmth and reason. I'm simply noting that you have responsibilities, vulnerabilities. The world is dangerous for a single father with limited resources. $20 million buys a lot of security, a lot of peace of mind. He placed a business card beside Helena's. The contrast was stark, hers simple and professional, his embossed with gold lettering and a phone number that was probably untraceable. 72 hours, Mr. Turner. Choose wisely. Victor left without paying for the coffee he hadn't ordered. Through the window, John watched him climb into a black Mercedes that had probably cost more than the farmhouse was worth. John's hands shook as he pulled out his phone. A quick search for Victor Arsov brought up nothing legitimate. No business registration, no LinkedIn profile, nothing that would survive legal scrutiny. But deeper searches, the kind that used terms like black market and art dealer, brought whispers. Forum posts that vanished. References in articles about organized crime and cultural property theft. This wasn't a businessman. This was a criminal offering to buy stolen goods with money that probably came from worse crimes. And the threat against his children had been clear, even wrapped in courtesy. John drove home in a daze, his mind spinning through impossible scenarios. 20 million versus doing the right thing. His children's safety versus his integrity. When he pulled into the driveway, an unfamiliar sedan was parked near the house. A woman in a dark suit stood on the porch, her posture radiating federal authority even before she showed her credentials. Mr. Turner? I'm Special Agent Diane Foster, FBI Art Crime Team. I need to speak with you about items that may be located on this property. John's world tilted. Helena had said 48 hours. It had been barely 24. Dr. Kovalenko didn't wait. Dr. Kovalenko contacted us as a courtesy after her visit. But we'd already flagged the activity on your internet connection. Diane's expression was professional but not unkind. Database searches for stolen art trigger automatic FBI notifications, Mr. Turner. Especially when combined with your grandfather's service record and known presence in art recovery zones. Ray appeared from around the house, the kids trailing behind him. Connor ran to John, wrapping arms around his legs. Lily hung back, her expression unreadable. Dad? What's happening? Go inside with Ray, John said quietly. I need to talk to this woman. Diane waited until the kids were out of earshot. I have a warrant to search the property. We can do this cooperatively, or we can do it the hard way. Your choice. John thought of Victor's threat, of Helena's ultimatum, of his children watching from the window as federal agents tore apart their last refuge. I'll show you. He led her to the basement, through the concealed door, down into the bunker. Diane's expression remained neutral as she swept a flashlight across the vault. But her voice tightened when she saw the paintings. Jesus, Kovalenko was right. My grandfather. Your grandfather committed multiple federal crimes. Theft of cultural property. Trafficking in stolen goods. Customs violations. Diane turned to face him. The statute of limitations has expired on most of it, but that doesn't change the fact that this collection is evidence in ongoing restitution cases. It's now under federal seizure pending investigation. I can't sell them. You can't touch them. Can't move them. Can't even think about them without my knowledge. Diane's tone softened slightly. I read your file, Mr. Turner. I'm sorry about your wife, about your situation, but this collection doesn't belong to you. It never did. John sagged against the concrete wall. The fantasy of salvation crumbled completely. No sale. No 20 million. No salvation. Just Ray's voice from the top of the stairs. John? Connor wants to know if we're rich now. And somewhere out there, Viktor Arsov's 72-hour clock was ticking. The FBI's presence transformed the farmhouse into a crime scene. Evidence markers. Photographers documenting every painting. Diane's team worked with clinical efficiency while John sat at the kitchen table, watching his last hope being cataloged and tagged. Ray had taken the kids to town. Ice cream, he'd said, his gruff voice gentle with understanding. Lily had looked back at her father with something like pity before climbing into Ray's truck. That was 3 hours ago. Now, as evening shadows stretched across the kitchen floor, John heard a car pull up the driveway. Through the window, he watched Helena emerge from a rental sedan, followed by an elderly woman who moved with careful dignity despite her age. Diane met them at the door, her expression shifting to something softer. Dr. Kovalenko, Mrs. Strauss. The name hit John like a fist. Rebecca Strauss, the girl from the photograph, the survivor. Helena guided the older woman inside, her hand gentle at Rebecca's elbow. In person, Rebecca was smaller than John had imagined. Thin and elegant, her white hair styled simply, her face lined with years that had contained more grief than most people could fathom. But her eyes were sharp, assessing, carrying the weight of someone who'd learned early that appearances could kill. Mr. Turner. Helena's voice was formal. This is Rebecca Strauss. She flew in from Berlin yesterday when I told her we'd located her family's paintings. John stood awkwardly, unsure of protocol. What did you say to someone whose childhood you'd been contemplating selling? Rebecca studied him with those sharp eyes, then spoke in accented English that carried the musicality of her native German. You look frightened. Don't be. I didn't come here to punish you. Mrs. Strauss, John's voice failed him. Sit. Rebecca took a chair at the table, folding her hands in her lap. Please. I'm too old to stand on ceremony. John sat. Helena and Diane remained standing, witnesses to whatever this was. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. I was 4 years old when they came. Kristallnacht, they called it. The night of broken glass. Such a pretty name for such ugliness. Her fingers traced patterns on the table, unconscious. They took everything. Not just possessions, identity, dignity, the right to exist. My father owned a gallery. Beautiful things surrounded us. Art was how he understood God. She pulled a photograph from her purse, the same one Helena had shown John. But this copy was worn from handling, the edges soft. This was taken 3 weeks before. I remember the dress. White organdy. Scratched. A ghost of a smile. My mother made me stand still for the photograph. I wanted to run, to play. Children don't understand permanence. We think everything lasts forever. John's throat tightened. They took my father first. Then my mother. I was hidden by a Catholic family. Good people who risked death to save a Jewish child they didn't know. I survived. My parents didn't. Rebecca's voice remained steady, factual. I spent 70 years searching for anything that remained. Any trace that my family existed, that we mattered, that our life was real and not just nightmare. She looked directly at John. 3 paintings in your grandfather's vault belong to us. The Renoir that hung in my bedroom. A Monet my father loved. A small Degas my mother inherited from her own mother. I didn't know, John whispered. Of course you didn't. How could you? Rebecca's expression was understanding, not accusing. Your grandfather took them. Perhaps he thought he had reason. Perhaps he felt entitled after what he'd seen. War makes thieves of good men sometimes. She reached across the table, her hand papery and cool against John's. But you're not him. You have a choice he never gave himself. You can continue the theft or you can end it. The kitchen door opened. Lily stood there, having somehow slipped away from Ray. She stared at Rebecca with wide eyes, recognition dawning. You're the girl, Lily said quietly. From the painting. Rebecca turned, her breath catching. And you must be Lily. Dr. Kovalenko told me about you. That you draw. Lily approached slowly, her sketch journal clutched to her chest. She opened it, showing Rebecca the careful study she'd made of the Renoir, the portrait of a young woman that had hung in a bedroom 70 years ago. Rebecca's composure finally cracked. Tears slipped down her weathered cheeks as she looked at Lily's drawing. You have talent. Real talent. Her voice shook. My mother painted. Not professionally, but beautifully. She would have loved this. I'm sorry they took her, Lily said with a child's directness. So am I, Liebling. Every day. Rebecca wiped her eyes. May I see it? The painting? Diane nodded. I'll escort you. John led them to the basement, through the concealed passage, into the vault where his grandfather's theft was preserved in climate-controlled perfection. Rebecca moved slowly, her eyes sweeping across the collection with a mixture of grief and wonder. When she saw the Renoir, she stopped. Her hand rose to her mouth. It's exactly as I remember. Exactly. She moved closer, her fingers hovering near the canvas without touching. I used to talk to her, the woman in the painting. I'd tell her secrets, dreams, childish things. She stood there for a long moment, silent communion with a piece of her lost childhood. Lily had followed them down. She pulled out her journal, began sketching quickly. Rebecca standing before the Renoir, past and present colliding in pencil strokes. Your grandfather did a terrible thing, Rebecca said finally, not turning from the painting. He stole what belonged to murdered people. He kept it hidden while families searched. That was wrong, unforgivable by many measures. She turned to face John. But he also preserved it. He kept these paintings safe through decades when they could have been lost forever. Destroyed. Scattered. And now you have the chance to do what he couldn't. To make a different choice. I wanted to keep them, John admitted, his voice raw. I needed them. The money. My kids are watching you. Rebecca's gaze was gentle but unyielding. Learning what you value. What you'll sacrifice for survival. My father used to say that desperation reveals character. It doesn't create it. You're desperate. I see that. But you're also a father who wants his children to respect him. To understand that some things matter more than comfort. Lily finished her sketch, tearing the page carefully from her journal. She offered it to Rebecca. For you. So you can remember. Rebecca took the drawing with shaking hands. The sketch showed her standing before the Renoir. Her young self and old self somehow both present in the image. A testament to continuity despite horror. Thank you, Rebecca whispered. She pulled Lily into a gentle embrace. You remind me that goodness survives. That beauty can come from grief. They climbed back to the kitchen. Helena made tea. Diane took phone calls. And Rebecca told stories. About her parents. About Vienna before the war. About paintings and galleries and a world that existed before madness consumed it. John listened, his children's inheritance dissolving into human faces. Real losses, grief that transcended his own. When Rebecca finally prepared to leave, she touched John's arm. The art survived. So did I. Let that mean something. Let it be enough. After she'd gone, Lily looked at her father. We're giving them back, aren't we? John thought of Victor's threat. The 72 hours ticking down. The debt that would crush them. The farmhouse they'd lose. But he also thought of Rebecca's tears, of his daughter's sketch, of Sarah's voice asking what kind of man he was becoming. "Yes," he said. "We're giving them back." Lily nodded, satisfied. Then she went upstairs, leaving John alone with his decision and the consequences waiting to unfold. Outside, night was falling, and somewhere in that darkness Viktor Arsov's patience was running out. The plan came together in Ray's kitchen over bitter coffee and desperation. Diane spread maps across the table, her FBI training evident in every calculated detail. Viktor wants the exchange at an abandoned warehouse outside Louisville. Industrial district, minimal surveillance, multiple exit routes. She tapped the location. "He's done this before. Then we use that against him." Ray's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd planned operations in worse conditions. "He expects you to fold, John. Expects a scared father doing anything to save his kid." "I am a scared father." "Good. Use it." Diane pulled up schematics on her laptop. "We'll wire you, put tracking devices in the paintings crates. My tactical team positions here, here, and here." Her finger traced points around the warehouse. "You go in, make the exchange, we move when Connor's clear." "What if he suspects?" "He will." Ray leaned forward. "Viktor didn't survive this long being careless. He'll check for wires, scan for tracking devices. So we give him some to find." Helena arrived with something unexpected. FBI Art Division had worked through the night creating forgeries. Perfect replicas of 5 paintings, aged and distressed to pass cursory inspection. "Mix them with 3 real pieces," she explained. "Viktor's expert will need time to authenticate. That gives us a window." John stared at the forgeries, his hands shaking. "If he figures it out before Connor's safe." "He won't." Diane's tone was firm. "We've done this before. Not with art this valuable, but the principles are the same. Trust the plan." 36 hours later, John drove a rented truck toward Louisville. 8 crated paintings secured in the back. 3 real masterworks. 5 expert fakes. And enough surveillance equipment hidden in the crates frames to coordinate a military operation. The wire itched against his chest. The backup weapon Diane had insisted he carry felt heavy in his jacket. Everything felt wrong. His phone buzzed. Viktor's instructions. "Doc 7. Come alone. Any sign of law enforcement and we're done." The warehouse loomed ahead, rust-streaked and hollow. John's headlights cut through gathering dusk as he backed the truck to the loading dock. His heart hammered against his ribs. Viktor emerged from the shadows, 2 men flanking him. Professional, armed. Their eyes swept the truck, the surrounding area, looking for exactly what was there. Federal agents in concealed positions, watching through scopes. "Mr. Turner. Punctual. I appreciate that." Viktor's smile was all charm and threat. "The paintings. Where's my son?" Viktor gestured. Another vehicle pulled forward. The door opened, and Connor stumbled out, his face tear-streaked but defiant. John's chest constricted. "Daddy." "Stay there, buddy. It's okay." John's voice cracked. Viktor's expert approached the truck, a small woman with sharp eyes and equipment for examining canvas and pigment. She began opening crates methodically. Time stretched. John watched Connor, watched Viktor's men, watched the expert's expression for any sign she'd detected the forgeries. She examined the first painting, nodded. The second, paused slightly, then continued. The third, her eyes narrowed. Viktor noticed. "Problem. This Monet. The brushwork is exceptional, but the canvas tension." She pulled out a loupe, examining closer. "This isn't right." Viktor's expression went cold. His hand moved toward his jacket. "Now!" Diane's voice cracked through the night. FBI tactical teams erupted from concealment. Floodlights blazed. Viktor's men reached for weapons. John was already moving, sprinting toward Connor. One of Viktor's men blocked his path. Ray appeared from an unexpected angle, his Marine training evident as he took the man down hard. Gunfire erupted. John grabbed Connor, shielding him with his body as they ran. Behind them, Viktor was shouting orders, his composure finally shattered. More shots. Ray grunted, stumbling. Blood bloomed on his shoulder. Ray! Get the boy out! Ray's voice was tight with pain but commanding. Go! John ran. Connor clutched against his chest. His son's sobs muffled against his jacket. Behind them, the operation devolved into chaos. FBI agents closing in. Victor's network collapsing under coordinated assault. They reached Ray's truck where he'd positioned it. John fumbled with keys, his hands shaking. Connor crying in the passenger seat. The engine caught. John floored it, tires screaming as they escaped the industrial district. In his rearview mirror, he saw FBI vehicles converging, saw Victor being forced to his knees, saw Ray being loaded into an ambulance, his face gray but alive. Connor's arms wrapped around him, small and desperate. I want to go home. We're going home, buddy. We're going home. But even as John said it, he knew home had changed. The farmhouse waited, yes. But the paintings were evidence now. The collection was documented, tagged, destined for restitution. They'd saved Connor, captured Victor, done the right thing, and lost everything in the process. John pulled over 2 miles out, his hands shaking too badly to drive. He held Connor while they both cried, for fear released, for trauma survived, for the cost of choosing right over easy. His phone buzzed. Diane, Victor in custody. Ray stable. Well done. Well done. As if heroism was supposed to feel like this, hollowed out and terrified, clutching his son in a borrowed truck while everything crumbled. Connor's voice was small against his chest. Are we safe now? John thought of the debt still waiting. The farmhouse 90 days from seizure. The future still impossible. But his son was breathing. Alive. Here. Yeah, buddy. We're safe. It was the first lie he'd told that felt like truth. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee. John sat with Connor asleep against his shoulder. The boys gripped tight even in exhaustion. Lily sketched in her journal, her pencil moving in sharp, processing strokes. The night's chaos rendered in lines and shadows. Ray had survived surgery. The bullet had torn through his shoulder, missing major arteries by inches. Diane sat across from them, her professional mask finally cracked, showing the exhaustion beneath. He'll recover. 3 months physical therapy, but he'll be fine. She rubbed her eyes. Victor's in federal custody. His entire network is being rolled up, buyers, transporters, the whole operation. You helped us close cases we've been building for years. John felt nothing. No triumph. No relief. Just bone-deep weariness. The paintings. In federal evidence custody. Helena's coordinating with the Art Loss Register, museums, family representatives. Diane pulled out a tablet showing him documentation. 17 families identified so far. 8 museum collections. The restitution process will take months, maybe years, but it's happening. And us? Diane's expression softened with something like pity. You're clear of any wrongdoing. Your cooperation, your grandfather's journal confession. It all supports that you inherited this unknowingly and chose to do the right thing. The right thing. The phrase felt hollow when his son still flinched at sudden noises. When Ray was in a hospital bed because of John's choices. When the foreclosure notice still waited at home. A nurse appeared. Mr. Donovan is awake. Asking for you. Ray looked diminished in the hospital bed. His shoulder heavily bandaged. His weathered face gray with pain. But his eyes lit up when he saw Connor. Hey, little man. You okay? Connor nodded, suddenly shy. You got shot saving us. Nah, just got in the way. Ray's attempt at lightness didn't hide the wince as he shifted. Your dad's the hero. Ran straight into danger for you. John's throat tightened. Ray, I'm so... Don't. Ray's voice was firm. I knew what I was doing. Made my choice same as you made yours. Some things are worth bleeding for. Over the next week, John watched his choice ripple outward in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Helena arrived with representatives from families receiving their art back. An elderly man from Amsterdam whose grandfather's Vermeer was finally coming home. A museum curator from Prague whose collection would be made whole. Each meeting reinforced the human cost of his grandfather's theft and the profound impact of its return. Connor's nightmares were worse. John hired a child therapist with money he didn't have, adding to debt that already felt insurmountable. But his son needed it. Needed someone to help process trauma that shouldn't have touched a 7-year-old. Lily created a series of sketches, the paintings, Rebecca, the warehouse confrontation, processing everything through her art. Her teacher called them powerful, asked permission to display them at school. The local paper picked up the story. Local Girls Art chronicles family's choice to return stolen masterworks. The headline made John feel like a fraud. Hero. That word again. As if heroism was supposed to feel like drowning. The farmhouse tax lien remained. 72 days until seizure. John applied for jobs, but a gap in employment combined with limited local opportunities meant rejection after rejection. Then, 3 weeks after the warehouse, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, a cashier's check for $12,000 and a handwritten note. For the taxes. Your family needs stability. What you did, returning what belonged to us, deserves to be honored. Consider this a gift, not a debt. Rebecca Strauss, John sat at the kitchen table, staring at the check through blurred vision. Rebecca, who'd lost everything, who'd spent 70 years searching, was paying to keep his family housed. He called Helena, voice-breaking. I can't accept this. She insisted. Said you gave her back her childhood, her parents' memory. $12,000 is nothing compared to that. Helena paused. Let someone help you, John. You've earned it. Diane closed the FBI investigation formally, her report praising John's cooperation and moral courage. The file noted Thomas Turner's confession, documented the collection's return, cleared John of any criminal intent. The local newspaper ran a feature. Single father returns $157 million in stolen art, chooses integrity over fortune. The article framed John as heroic, a man who'd faced impossible choices and emerged on the right side of history. John read it and felt sick. They didn't mention the 3 days he'd spent calculating how to sell pieces quietly. Didn't mention how close he'd come to choosing differently. Didn't mention that desperation had nearly made him exactly what his grandfather had been. One afternoon, John finally visited Thomas's grave. The cemetery was small, rural, Thomas's headstone simple. Thomas Turner, 1918 to 2025, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. John stood there, Connor and Lily flanking him, and tried to find words for a grandfather he'd barely known. You made a terrible choice, John said quietly. Kept it hidden for 50 years. Died alone with your guilt. He paused, feeling his children's presence. But you left that journal. Left a map for someone to make it right. Maybe that was the best you could do. Lily placed flowers, wildflowers from the farmhouse property. Great-grandpa kept the art safe. That matters too, doesn't it? John thought about that. 70 years of climate control, careful preservation, ensuring masterpieces survived when they could have been destroyed. Thomas's theft had been wrong, but his care had meant families could be reunited with their history. Yeah, honey, that matters. Letters arrived from families receiving their art. A woman in Tel Aviv whose grandmother's portrait was finally coming home. A museum in Warsaw thanking him for returning pieces they'd thought lost forever. Each letter was gratitude John didn't feel he'd earned. But one letter struck differently. From Rebecca, longer than the others. Dear John, I've spent my life searching for remnants of what was stolen. Your grandfather took from us, yes, but you gave back what he couldn't. That choice, made when you were desperate, when keeping the art would have solved everything, that choice redeems something. Not his theft, but perhaps the belief that people can choose better than their circumstances demand. Your children watched you choose integrity over survival. That's a legacy worth more than any painting. Thank you for breaking a cycle, for showing that inheritance isn't just what we receive, but what we pass forward. With deepest gratitude, Rebecca. John folded the letter carefully, his vision blurred. Ray recovered slowly, his shoulder healing but stiff. He refused John's attempts to help with medical bills. You gave back $157 million in art. I took a bullet. We're even. His grin was crooked. Besides, someone's got to make sure this farmhouse doesn't fall down around you. The community embraced them in quiet ways. Casseroles appeared on the porch. Ray's contractor friends offered labor at cost for farmhouse repairs. The local school waived some fees for the kids. Small kindnesses that felt like absolution John wasn't sure he deserved. 3 months after the warehouse, John stood in the farmhouse basement, looking at the empty vault. Federal evidence teams had removed everything. Paintings, Thomas's journals, all physical proof of the secret that had nearly destroyed them. The space felt hollow, waiting to be filled with something better. Connor appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Dad, can we make this into something? Like a fort or a playroom? John looked at his son. Resilient, healing, still carrying trauma but facing forward. Yeah, buddy, we can make it into something good. That night, John wrote his own letter to his children to be opened when they were older. I want you to know how close I came to choosing wrong. How tempting it was to keep what wasn't ours, to justify theft because we were desperate. Your mother would have been ashamed of the man I almost became. But you, both of you, reminded me who I wanted to be. Lily, your questions about doing right. Connor, your trust that I'd protect you without compromising who we are. You saved me from myself. The art is gone. We're still struggling. But we have something worth more. We have integrity. We have each other. And we have the knowledge that when it mattered most, we chose to be people your mother would have recognized. That's the real inheritance. Love, Dad. He sealed it, placed it with Thomas's journal, artifacts of choices made across generations. Outside, the Kentucky night pressed close. The farmhouse still needed repairs. Debt still waited. The future was still uncertain. But they were together. They were whole. And they'd chosen right when choosing wrong would have been so much easier. That would have to be enough. 6 months had rewritten everything. The farmhouse no longer sagged under neglect. Ray, recovered and moving with only a slight stiffness in his shoulder, had overseen renovations that transformed decay into possibility. New windows caught morning light. The porch stood level. The barn was being converted into a workshop. Ray's idea, a place where John could build the consulting business he'd started. Turner Agricultural Marketing. Small, modest, focused on helping local farms reach urban markets. 3 clients so far, revenue barely covering expenses, but sustainable. Growing. John stood in what had been his grandfather's bedroom, now his office, looking at the framed photograph Connor had found that first day. Thomas Turner in his army uniform, young and serious, carrying secrets that would poison 50 years. You ready? Lily appeared in the doorway, her suitcase packed for Berlin. The invitation had arrived 2 months ago. The Holocaust Remembrance Museum was opening an exhibition of recovered looted art, including the Strauss family's 3 paintings. Rebecca had requested that John and his children attend. Had arranged everything, insisting they needed to see what their choice had made possible. Almost. John picked up the letter he'd written, sealed and addressed to Thomas Turner's memory. He'd leave it at the grave before they left. Closure, maybe, or just acknowledgement that breaking cycles required understanding what created them. The flight was long. Connor slept most of the way, his nightmares finally fading to occasional bad dreams. Lily sketched constantly. The clouds, passengers, her own anticipation rendered in careful lines. Berlin was cold and beautiful. The museum stood in the heart of the city, modern architecture contrasting with historical weight. Inside, the exhibition was called Zurückgegeben, returned. Rebecca met them in the entrance hall. She'd aged in 6 months, her movements more careful, but her eyes were bright. She embraced Lily first, then Connor, then John. You came. I wasn't sure you would. We needed to, John said quietly. Needed to see. The exhibition was extraordinary. Each recovered piece was displayed with its history. Photographs of the original owners, documentation of the theft, stories of survival and loss. The Strauss family section was near the center. Rebecca's parents stared from a photograph taken in 1937. Jacob and Miriam, young and elegant, standing in their gallery. Behind them, visible through an archway, the Renoir that would outlive them. The painting itself hung beside the photograph, reunited with its context after 70 years. But what made John's breath catch was the addition beneath it, Lily's sketch. The one she'd given Rebecca that day in the farmhouse. Framed and displayed, showing Rebecca both young and old before the painting that connected her past to her present. "They asked to include it," Rebecca said softly. "Your daughter's art, bearing witness to return, to healing." Lily stared at her own work, displayed in a museum, her artistic voice recognized as part of history. Connor tugged John's sleeve. "Dad, look, there's great-grandpa." In a side section, documentation of the recovery included Thomas Turner's journal. Select pages, his confession and guilt preserved behind glass. The placard read, "The complexity of wartime choices, theft as both crime and preservation." John read his grandfather's words displayed for the world. "I took from those who stole, but theft is theft. I've spent 50 years in a prison of my own making." And beneath it, the curator's note. Thomas Turner's grandson chose to return what his grandfather could not. This collection survives because of complicated preservation, and finds justice through uncomplicated choice. The opening ceremony was attended by families from across Europe. John met descendants of the Goldman family, whose Monet now hung in Amsterdam. Met a Polish museum director whose collection was finally whole. Each conversation reinforced that his choice, made in desperation and fear, had rippled across continents. Rebecca introduced her grandchildren to Lily and Connor. For generations removed from tragedy, but connected now through art and restitution. The children talked awkwardly at first, then with growing ease. Connor showed Rebecca's grandson his drawings of the farmhouse. Lily and Rebecca's granddaughter discussed art techniques, forming a connection across language and history. At the reception, a journalist asked John about his decision. "You could have kept the collection, solved all your financial problems. Why didn't you?" John thought about the 3 days of temptation, the calculations, the rationalizations, how close he'd come to choosing differently. "Because my children were watching," he said finally, "and I wanted them to learn that some things matter more than comfort, that we don't get to keep what was never ours, no matter how badly we need it. Even at great personal cost? Especially then. That's when it means something." The article would run in international papers, framing him as heroic. John still felt like a fraud. But maybe that was the point. Real moral choice wasn't made by saints, but by desperate people choosing against their interests. That evening, Rebecca hosted a small dinner. Her apartment was filled with recovered memories, photographs, documents, and now the sketch Lily had given her, holding place of honor. "I spent 70 years searching," Rebecca said over wine John barely touched, "believing that if I could find anything, any piece of my family's existence, it would prove we mattered, that we were real, not just statistics." She gestured to the sketch. "Your daughter gave me that proof. Not just the painting, but this evidence that our story continues. That young people care, remember, bear witness." Lily blushed under the praise. Connor asked if Rebecca had known any war heroes. The conversation turned lighter, memories shared across generations. Before they left Berlin, John took his children to the memorial for murdered Jews of Europe. They walked among the concrete blocks in silence, Connor holding his hand, Lily processing through observation. "This is what great-grandpa saw," Connor said quietly. "The people who died." "Yes. And he took their stuff." John winced at his son's bluntness. "He did. But we gave it back." Connor looked up, his 7-year-old logic working through complexity. "So we fixed it? We helped fix part of it. The art part. But we can't fix what happened to the people." Lily spoke without turning from the memorial. "Mom used to say you can't change the past. Only how the future responds to it." Sarah's wisdom carried forward through their daughter. They flew home to Kentucky, to the farmhouse that was finally becoming theirs through honest means. Ray picked them up at the airport, his truck familiar and grounding. "How was it?" "Important," John said. "Hard. Good." Back at the farmhouse, John found a letter waiting. Official letterhead from the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. His consulting business had been selected for a small business development grant. Not life-changing money, but enough. Validation that his work mattered. Another letter, from a farm cooperative in Tennessee, asking about his services. Word was spreading. That night, John finished reading Thomas's journal one final time. Then he placed it in a box with Rebecca's letters, Lily's exhibition catalog, Connor's drawings from therapy, documentation of their choice and its consequences. He added his own letter, the one he'd written to his children, and sealed the box. Tomorrow he'd start building shelves in the old vault. Transform the space that had hidden theft into something that held their real inheritance. Evidence of choosing right when wrong would have been easier. John stood in the farmhouse doorway, watching his children play in the yard. Connor was building something elaborate with sticks. Lily sketched the barn, her artistic voice growing stronger. They weren't wealthy. The medical debt was being managed through payment plans that would take decades. The farmhouse still needed work. The future was uncertain. But they were whole. They had integrity. They had proof that when it mattered most, they'd chosen to be people Sarah would have recognized. Ray appeared beside him, coffee mugs in hand. Thinking heavy thoughts? Just thinking about inheritance. What we passed down. Your kids inherited something better than money. Ray gestured to where Lily was showing Connor her sketch. They inherited the knowledge that their father chose them over fortune. That's worth more than any painting. John thought about Thomas, who'd chosen survival and lived 50 years in isolation. Thought about his own moment in the vault, surrounded by stolen beauty, calculating salvation. I almost didn't, almost chose the money. But you didn't. That's what matters. Later, John planted a tree in Sarah's memory. A dogwood, her favorite. Lily and Connor helped dig the hole, their small hands covered in Kentucky soil. This tree will grow with you, John told them. And someday, when you're older, you'll remember the year we chose right. The year we learned that we define ourselves not by what happens to us, but by how we respond. Connor patted the soil around the tree's base. Will Mom see it? From heaven? I think so, buddy. I think she sees everything we do. Lily was quiet, but her hand found John's. She understood what he meant, that Sarah's values lived on through their choices, that memory wasn't just preservation but continuation. The sun set over 80 acres that no longer felt like burden. The farmhouse stood solid, built on honest foundation. And somewhere in Berlin, paintings told stories of theft and return, bearing witness to the possibility that cycles could be broken. John Turner stood with his children, planting roots in soil earned through integrity rather than inheritance. They weren't rich, they weren't secure, but they were whole. And that, finally, was enough. The farmhouse waited, ready to be filled with better memories. The vault below stood empty, prepared for transformation. And three people who'd chosen right over easy looked toward a future built on foundation that would hold. Not because it was easy, but because some things, integrity, example, the respect of your children, were worth more than any fortune. The tree would grow. The children would remember. And the story of what they'd chosen would outlast any painting. That was the real inheritance. The one that mattered. The one they'd pass forward. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.